everybody, it's Dr. Tracy Papa. I'm a high-risk OB specialist in Fort Worth, Texas. Today's episode, we're going to see Kristin. Kristin had a baby named Hannah who had trisomy 18. It's a very compelling story. I think you'll all feel for her as she went through this process of being diagnosed and then figuring out how we were going to manage the pregnancy and how she was going to make the most of the limited time she knew she was going to have with baby Hannah. I also want you to pay attention to the fact that even though Kristin is an engineer and now a nurse, so should know better, how she listened to the counseling for chromosome abnormalities and jumped right to the boy or girl part, and that's what she heard. Remember that when we offer genetic testing, we're looking for chromosome abnormalities and genetic syndromes and things like that. So listen to the whole counseling, otherwise when you get your results back, you may get more results than you bargained for.
My name's Kristen Cook. I am a mother, a wife, an engineer, and a nurse, and I'm here to talk about my daughter Hannah, who had trisomy 18. Hannah was my third child, and I had gotten a little blasé about the whole pregnancy thing. Third baby, my first two, Evelyn and James, they were so easy. My body liked pregnancy, my body liked birth, and they were great kids. So I didn't think too much of it. And so I came to see Dr. Papa because I was advanced maternal age. So I'm a geriatric mother, have been for all of my pregnancies. And Dr. Papa gave us the option for a new blood test. It's called the NIPT. It's a non-invasive prenatal testing. So it's a screening test that can tell you if your child has a trisomy. But more importantly to me at the time, it could tell me if it was a boy or a girl. And when I found out if it was a boy or a girl, that's when the pregnancy really felt real to me. I can remember the first sonogram that I had with Dr. Papa. I was just, third baby, I see him there, everything's fine. So then they took the blood. I went on with my life. A couple weeks later, I was at work. I had gone to a meeting. When I came back from the meeting, there was a voicemail from the genetic counselor on my phone asking me to call. So I called, I'm sitting at my desk, I call, and the genetic counselor said, your results have come back, and we need to tell you that your baby has trisomy 18. Immediately, I flew to Google because I had never heard of trisomy 18 before in my life. And as I'm reading, I have no idea what the genetic counselor said to me because I was reading the screen. And as I was reading the screen, my heart started dropping because it said that my child was not going to live. The next thing I remember the genetic counselor asking was, do you want to know the gender? Of course I want to know the gender. That was the whole reason for doing this test. Yes, I want to know the gender. And I found out that I was having a girl. And that was exciting because according to what I just read, girls had a better chance of living. So there was my first bright side. But now I'm up at work, an hour from home, an hour and a half from my husband, and I have this devastating news. And I had to call my husband and give him this devastating news. So I went to the mom's room. It was a key card access, and I still had access. So I went to the mom's room because I knew there I would be alone. And I called him, and I read the sheet to him that I had printed out. And that's when our world changed. So the next thing, my husband and I immediately started looking up what trisomy 18 was. And I was immediately drawn to journal articles. Somewhere along the way, I realized that the best information was going to come from the medical journals. So we started reading. I think it was just Googling. I think all I did was Google, and I was looking for specific things. I think at that point I was specifically looking for how good is the NIPT? How is this really a conclusive test, or was there still some wiggle room? So that, because I was looking for those specific terms, it drew me both to the journal articles, but it also drew me to some forums of other families who had had diagnoses of trisomy 18 using a screening test. And that proved to be one of the biggest blessings. I can still remember looking at the pictures of Grace, her mom, who lives down in Austin, which I had no idea at the time, but she put up pictures of her daughter Grace, and Grace was beautiful. She was absolutely beautiful. And everything I'd been reading mostly had been journal articles, so they were very technical. And so there were all of these words that were so long and strange and confusing, and made me feel like my daughter was going to look strange and confusing. And then I saw Grace, and she was beautiful. And seeing her made me feel like I can do this. I can do this. So it was a big search of who else has gone down this path. Obviously, we weren't the first. And what information do we need? What is trisomy 18? How much store can I put into the screening test? What would we need to look at on a sonogram in order to feel confident that, yes, the screening test was accurate? So our next step was just information. So there was a group on Baby Center that was for carrying to term. It was, never heard that term before, but those are the words we use for carrying a child who we don't know how long they'll live. So I found a group of women who had either had a child or were currently pregnant with a child that had some type of life-limiting condition. And the great thing is we're still in contact today. In fact, there's a group of them, about 8 of them, who are getting together this summer, meeting up in person. The other place that I found a lot of support was on Facebook. There's a couple of Facebook groups that have families who have children with trisomy 18 and trisomy 13. We tend to bucket those together because they do have so many similarities once the children are born and while the children are in the womb. So both of those support systems, undergirded with the journal articles, that's the information that my husband and I use to move forward. Both of us are engineers. In fact, at the time, we were both studying to take our professional engineering exam. So we're very data-driven. We like to look at the facts. And we're also not afraid to dig into things. And so I think those things together really helped us as we were coming to terms with the fact that our daughter was not going to live the life we had hoped for her. We did talk about amniocentesis. However, we knew that there was a risk of miscarriage with amniocentesis. And I can remember you telling us that the risk has gotten so low compared to what it used to be. You told us the story of how it was back in the day, where your mom would have to go someplace else, get a sonogram, they'd put an X on the spot on her belly of where to hit for, they'd walk back, and then you'd do the amnio that way. And that wasn't the case anymore. Now you could do it with the direct sono at the same time. But we knew there was a risk, and we knew that from this point forward, our job was to be Hannah's advocate and protector. And it didn't matter if she had trisomy 18 or not. She was our baby. She was our daughter. And it didn't matter. So I think figuring out what we wanted for Hannah took a little bit of time. I had to start at the beginning which was acknowledging that she was going to die. And we didn't know when, so she could pass at any point from that point on. And I believe I got the news when I was 13 weeks pregnant, possibly 15. So the first thing I had to do was make her funeral arrangements. I needed to figure out what we were gonna do when she passed. So we had to figure out, where were we gonna cremate, were we gonna bury, where were we gonna bury her? And so we had to get that figured out, because then I could wrap it in a little bow, had my notes in the back of my book, my Hannah book, and I could put that in my pocket and forget about that, because that had been dealt with. So then the question started to be, when was she gonna be born? Because that made all the difference. If she was going to be born so early that her chance of survival was slim to none, then we have one plan. But if it looked like she was going to survive long enough to be born, then another plan. And then if she's gonna live long enough and is doing well enough that she might come home from a hospital, that was another plan. So each day, each week, as we marched closer, it was a different event horizon. So to start with, all I wanted was to enjoy her as much as I could. In the beginning, it was very challenging, and I remembered that any time that I got too worried or upset about what was going on, I would tell myself that right now she's warm, she's safe, she's comfortable, and right now she's alive, and that's enough for today. And I could tell myself that and accept it and move on with the rest of my day to get to the next day. So she kept doing well. There were challenges, there were things, not challenges, but there were things that we had to watch. But she kept doing well. So I think the best way to say that is the first thing I needed to do was have the right team around me. So I needed a team that was going to help us get Hannah there in her best possible condition. And so between my obstetrician and you, together we worked, and I think it was just us, you and me and Dr. Motley and Jason, we worked together to get to about that 32-week mark. And then we started bringing other people in and started figuring out what were we gonna do when she was born. And that proved to be very challenging because I'd gotten really comfortable with our team. Our team was all together, and we're gonna do this and we're gonna do what it takes. We're gonna be watching her, we're going to be tracking her, and we're gonna get her here in the best possible shape. We added in Dr. Weinman, the palliative care doctor, to our team, and she started talking to us about what the possible options were. And that was a fantastic relationship because she would talk to us about different things, and then we would have time to go back and research. So I love the research. So we would go back and be able to research. We would be able to we went back and read through the AAP's policy on not feeding children with life-limiting conditions, and that was acceptable, ethically acceptable in the eyes of the AAP. That was an easy one for my husband and I. It was not acceptable for us. But then we had to start thinking about, well, how would we feed her? What if her stomach wasn't attached to her esophagus? How would we manage that? There were so many questions that we didn't really know until she got here. So again, it was putting together different, not contingency plans, but different plans. If this, then that. So trying very hard to stay focused on how do we give Hannah her best life. Not the longest life, but her best life. So that involved lots of discussion, lots of reading. One of the people that I met online on the Facebook group, she's a mom of a daughter who had trisomy 13, and she actually started writing journal articles with some of her providers. And so So I had the opportunity to talk to somebody who knew it from my side, from the mom's side, but she also understood how the medical system worked and how they viewed our children, and was a great person for me to bounce things off of, to figure out how is the best way to approach what we wanted and how to address that with the various medical team. We've talked about the palliative care team who came in and started giving options once she was born, but then the next piece we needed to pull in was the hospital and pull in the neonatologist. Again, research. When I had found out I was going to be delivering at a new hospital, and after finding out that Hannah was going to be her special little snowflake self, I cold called L&D and said, hey, I want to come up there and see your facility, but because of my situation, I don't think I can do that with just your standard tour. Would it be possible for me to come up and see? And the amazing nurse, Amy Decker, she invited me up. She talked to me for as long as we needed, and showed us the standard tour, but also this is how we do things differently for children that pass during birth or after birth. So I had developed this relationship with Amy, and then we layered in the neonatologist. Once we were close enough to the birth to know when it was going to happen, we layered in the neonatologist who was going to be there for the delivery. When we met with the neonatologist, we came in with a list of the things that we were wanting for Hannah. And one of the very first thing is that we wanted her to be full code, so we wanted them to do everything for her when she was born, if she was born in distress. And that almost stopped the meeting right there, because he said he would not perform compressions on Hannah. And it took a long time for us talking to him about why he wouldn't, before we could even move on to anything else. And ultimately we wound up tabling that conversation because we could not come to a place where we were all in agreement. So we continued discussing the other things and decided to meet back up the next week because there were many things that we didn't get to. So over the weekend, I had the opportunity to think about what he had said and do more research. And I thought back to one of the moms of a different child who talked about her child's heart beating for 2 hours even though she didn't appear to take a breath, and how strong her heart was. And between that conversation and speaking with a nurse friend of ours who dealt with neonates, I learned that in most cases, the heart is not the limiting factor when it comes to newborns. And if it is the limiting factor, then it's a pretty big one. So when I was able to take that information and compare it to the fact that we had decided we didn't want her to be intubated after birth because we wanted to be able to hold her, we wanted her to not have that invasive procedure done to us, I realized that we were not putting the same, we weren't using the same arguments when it came to CPR. That CPR was invasive. It could break her ribs. It's definitely a painful procedure. And if it was her heart that was the problem, that wasn't beating, then that was going to be a very shortened lifespan, and a large percentage of her life may have been spent getting compressions. And we did not want to have that invasive and painful procedure done to her for the same reasons that we didn't want intubation for her. So our goal for Hannah was to give her her best start in life. We wanted her to come out in the best possible condition so that her extrauterine life would start off in the best possible place. So there were a couple of components to that. One was the frequent monitoring. So I have more pictures of that girl in the womb than I think of any other child. We saw you frequently and got to where we could read the S/Ds and know what her numbers were, what the graph looked like, to tell us if she was holding steady or if something had changed. And through that, we started talking about how to deliver her. So one of the things that she was challenged with in utero was the fact that the blood flow through the umbilical cord was not as free-flowing as we would want. And because of that, it made things just a little bit harder for her. And that going through natural childbirth, through a vaginal childbirth, that would cause more stress on that blood flow during contractions. So we started talking about a C-section versus a natural delivery. This was terrifying to me because my first two kids I had had naturally with no drugs, and I was pretty proud of that too. And here all of a sudden I'm switching to a very medically managed mode of birth. But that was just the least I could do in order to give her her best chance at life and to give her her best start.
We're going to hear more from Kristin next week as she talks about what happens when Hannah was born and how they spent their time with Hannah for the limited time that they had her. It's a great story, so come back and watch the end of it. Remember too, to subscribe to the site, go to drtracypapa.com, click subscribe, and I'll send you some free amazing content, and you can get weekly updates in your inbox.